Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be reading some articles out of History magazine. And as you can tell by the title, we're talking about Turkish history. We're going to read this article about Atatürk, father of the Turkish nation. And we'll read about the Janissaries, source of Ottoman glory and decline. These articles were chosen by my channel members. They were chosen by Chris W., Marta, All the Happy Squirrels, Craig, Alessia, Laura Clatworthy, and Krista. Thank you so much to my channel members for selecting these articles. And if you watching this would like to select a future History magazine article, you can click the join button right down there, or if you're on mobile and you can't see it, you can click the very first link in the description box right down there to become a channel member. It is only 99 cents a month. The cheapest I can possibly set it. There's no other tiers or anything, and you get all sorts of bonus content. You get to request video topics that I make for you. You get your name in every video. You get to watch every video that I make early before everyone else gets to see it. You get to comment on it before anyone else. And you get to pick History magazine articles. So, we'd love to have you join. It would be so wonderful if you could hang out with us in our little club. We're going to start chronologically, I think. We should start with the Ottoman Empire and then go to Atatürk. I think that makes the most sense, doesn't it? So let's talk about the Janissaries. Here we go. One of the most feared institutions of the Ottoman Empire was the devshirme, a system of child conscription that takes its name from the Turkish word for collect. As the Ottomans conquered territories in Anatolia, Armenia, and the Balkans in the 1400s, they captured the most physically and intellectually able Christian boys. They were targeted partly because it was forbidden under Turkish law to enslave Muslims, but also because the strategy prevented the buildup of powerful rivals among future military leaders. In time, these children would be circumcised, converted to Islam, and transferred to the capital of the empire. In the first part of the 15th century, the capital was Edirne, today in the modern state of Turkey, near its border with Greece and Bulgaria. After the fall of Christian Constantinople to the Ottomans in 1453, it became the new Ottoman capital, later renamed as Istanbul. The abducted conscripts who were sent to Istanbul were paid and given opportunities. A few were enrolled in Enderun, the elite college within Topkapi Palace. Most, however, were sent to military schools where they were prepared for the army, training in the art of war, and learning absolute obedience to the Sultan. The vast majority of these conscripts would end up joining the corps of the Janissaries, or Janissary, Turkish for new soldiers, the most fearsome troops of the Ottoman army. And I do apologize if I mispronounce some Turkish. My bad. Doing my best. No disrespect intended. Conquerors and cops. Founded in the late 1300s as the Sultan's bodyguard, the Janissary division later became the standing army of the Ottoman state. Renowned as expert archers, they adopted the use of firearms in the 1440s. They also excelled as sappers, able to dig tunnels under the walls of besieged cities. Their participation was a decisive factor in the success of the Sultan's military campaigns, most notably in 1453, when the Ottoman Empire under Mehmed II conquered the Byzantine Empire. By the end of Mehmed II's reign in 1481, the number of Janissaries had doubled in size. In addition to their military duties, the Janissaries carried out other activities, such as maintaining public order. If there was a risk of rioting due to food shortages, it was the Janissaries who guarded the bakeries and the livestock of the state herds. The Janissaries patrolled the streets at night and acted as detectives, seemingly with remarkable effectiveness. Their secret links with underground networks of thieves made them particularly effective in recovering stolen goods. With their distinctive headwear, the Janissaries were a visible day-to-day reminder to the Sultan's subjects of Ottoman power. Spectacle was as important as fighting prowess. During Ottoman military parades, amid white banners, the Janissaries carried a huge copper cooking pot, an almost sacred symbol known as a kazan, in which their communal meal was made while on campaign. Sorry for my tummy right there. It was common to see the Janissaries in the markets of Istanbul around the ancient forum of Theodosius. Thanks to the subsidy the Janissaries received, they could claim free food and other staples. They were also known to frequent the numerous cafes and barber shops near the tekes, or monasteries, of the Bektashi Brotherhood, of whom they were followers. This Sufi mystic order was based on doctrines that mixed elements of ancient Turkish paganism, Buddhism, Shiism, and Christianity. The name of the group derives from Haji Bektash Veli, the 13th century founder of the order. In dread of mutiny. When the Janissaries were driving the great Ottoman conquests in the late 1400s, their numbers swelled. However, once the empire reached its peak under Suleiman the Magnificent in the mid-16th century, the presence in the capital of so many armed and trained men began to unsettle the Sultan and his ministers. The Janissaries became notorious for their readiness to mutiny, often announcing their revolt by the symbolic overturning of their kazans and refusing the food served in the palace. Numerous plots to depose viziers or high officials and dethrone sultans were driven by the Janissaries. It is hardly surprising that each new sultan, upon ascending the throne, sought to ingratiate himself with the Janissaries by offering them money. Attempts to rein them in often ended in disaster, such as with the fate of the teenaged Sultan Osman II, strangled in 1622 after he attempted to shut down the coffee shops where the Janissaries concocted their subversive plans. It was the first time the Janissaries had directly caused the death of a sultan, but it would not be the last. Decline and dishonor. While the Janissaries won glory for the Ottoman state, their flamboyance and excess were excused. By the 1600s, however, despite their large numbers and strength and skill in handling cavalry, they were struggling to prevail against the musket fire of the Habsburg armies in Europe. At home, the inhabitants of Istanbul increasingly regarded the Janissaries as thugs. Ordinary people had little recourse when they suffered abuses by them, since the Janissaries generally enjoyed impunity. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the Ottoman Empire began a slow, steady decline, in part due to the inability of the sultans to impose discipline on their forces. In the memoirs of his travels in Turkey and Greece, the British naval officer Adolphus Slade records the dismal reputation of the Janissaries early in the 19th century. Quote, "Lords of the day, they ruled with uncontrolled insolence in Constantinople, their appearance portraying the excess of libertinism. I don't know. Their foul language, their gross behavior, their enormous turbans, their open vests, their bulky sashes filled with arms, their weighty sticks, rendering them objects of fear and of disgust." End quote. The Janissaries' unruliness reached its apogee in 1806, following attempts at European-style reforms to the military by Selim III. Enraged at this threat to their preeminence, the Janissaries killed Selim, but their recklessness was already sowing the seeds of their destruction. In 1826, Mahmud II succeeded where all other sultans had failed, launching military reforms in parallel with careful planning against the Janissaries' inevitable revolt. The Janissaries overturned their symbolic cooking pots, but this time the authorities were ready for them. In what became known as the auspicious incident, thousands of Janissaries were massacred in their barracks. It was too late to save the Ottoman Empire, which disappeared just under a century later, but the reformed Turkish military would later produce a general called Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the post-Ottoman state of Turkey. It's a great transition, but we're going to read all of these boxes and look at the pictures first. It says, drumming up fear. And all their big drums. The Celts used the Carinx horn to intimidate their enemies, and the Greeks raised their troops' spirits with the trumpet-like salpinx. The Janissaries, much like early modern armies, used percussion as they marched into battle. During sieges, such as that of Constantinople in 1453, the bands kept up the thunderous music of cymbals, drums, and fifes day and night without ceasing, energizing the Ottoman troops and intimidating the local population. The march on Constantinople and later Vienna captured the European imagination, inspiring rousing fanfares such as Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 11 and Beethoven's Symphony No. 9. Everyone knows that. That's the da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. So this is a miniature, actually. So this is zoomed way in from the Book of Festivities in 1720. Here is Topkapi Palace, the gate of salutation of Topkapi Palace's first courtyard, where the Janissaries often held parades. It's such a beautiful building. This is a Yatagan sword of the Janissaries. Really elaborate hilt there. This is the Bork. I hope that's how you say that. An elaborate hat of feathers and spoons. The most characteristic element of the Janissary uniform was its headdress, the Bork. There are few surviving examples, but the Bork has been described as a large, rigid felt cap with a square flap falling behind. It often contained a pocket holding a spoon, a symbol of Janissary's camaraderie with his fellow soldiers and an acknowledgement of gratitude to the Sultan who provided his daily food. Many Borks had feathers protruding from the top. Over time, as the corps declined, the Bork gave way to extravagant turbans unsuitable for combat. By the 19th century, Janissaries were wearing other types of headwear, including the classic Turkish fez. The singular hats worn by the army became a particular preoccupation with modern Turkey's first president, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, in 1925. Ataturk passed a law that was never enforced that required Turkish men to wear Western-style hats. I can see in the corner here a little fez. We'll read about that when we read about Atatürk. It says Janissaries parade before the walls of Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia today, in a miniature painting from a 16th century account of the Ottoman conquest of western Georgia. So yeah, this looks like it, right? The big top, the flap behind, and I guess a feather right there. Oh, yeah, these have, I think those are their guns. If I see big tall feathers, I bet those are their weapons. And here is the symbolic pot. It says, every Janissary regiment had a cooking pot called a kazan, from which food was distributed with an enormous ladle. So that's a ladle. The kazan was of major significance. Losing it in combat was punishable by expulsion, and overturning it was a signal of mutiny. So yeah, Janissary ladle bearer, it says, from an English engraving in the 19th century. It's a good example there of their turbans later on. Big ladle. Imagine how big that pot is if that's the ladle. But let's move to more modern times and talk about the founding of the modern country of Turkey with Atatürk, father of the nation. The surname Mustafa Kemal formally assumed a few years before his death in 1938 is the name the world remembers him by, Atatürk, meaning father of the Turks. The sobriquet was not an exaggeration. The modern nation of Turkey was shaped primarily by his complex and sometimes paradoxical personality. He was a proponent of emancipating women, yet authoritarian. He was proud of his Turkish identity, yet a passionate Westernizer. His leadership has cast a long shadow over the modern state of Turkey since its founding in the fall of 1923. From Greece to Mecca. Although the new state marked a break in history, it and Atatürk can be understood only within the context of the sprawling, multi-ethnic Ottoman Empire it replaced. As we know, in 1453, said it like a million times, more than a century after the Muslim Ottoman Empire was founded by the 13th century ruler Osman I, it conquered Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire and causing consternation in Christian Europe. Constantinople, later known as Istanbul, became a diplomatic powerhouse. For centuries, the Sultan's armies and navies would rattle Europe, culminating in the Siege of Vienna in 1683. Although the Ottomans failed to take Vienna and expand westward, their supremacy of the eastern Mediterranean was overwhelming. Throughout much of its history, the empire controlled the Balkans and Greece, the eastern Mediterranean seaboard that today comprises Syria, Israel, and Lebanon, the western strip of modern-day Saudi Arabia, including Mecca, and Egypt and Libya. However, the Ottoman Empire began to be overtaken economically by the West, and by the late 1800s, it started to fall apart. The nationalists, known as the Young Turks, sought to halt this decline. In 1908, they sparked a revolution that would unseat Sultan Abdul Hamid II and established a parliamentary monarchy. In 1912, the Ottomans lost swaths of European territory. Amid a surge of Turkish nationalism and hostility toward other ethnicities of the empire, the Ottomans joined the First World War on the side of Germany. Their narrow vision of Turkishness regarded Armenians as enemies, and Ottoman authorities ordered the mass deportation of Armenian Christians westward to Syria in 1915. Even as the First World War raged, the Turkish army carried out mass killings of Armenians, resulting in an estimated death toll between 664,000 and over 1 million people. The Ottomans, having tied themselves to the losing side of the war, signed the Armistice of Mudros in 1918. This led to the dismantling of the Ottoman Empire. It provided the foundation for creating an independent Armenia and autonomy for the Kurds. During this time, French, British, and Italian troops occupied the country, including Istanbul. Many Turks believed they faced a threat to their very existence as a people. Foreign occupation, and especially the 1919 Greek invasion of Turkey, sparked renewed nationalist fervor. All the discontented needed was a unifying leader, and Sultan Mehmed VI provided them with one. In May 1919, he sent a general who made a name for himself during the First World War, particularly in the Gallipoli campaign, one of the few Ottoman victories during the war, to southern Anatolia. The general would one day be known as Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, a new leader. Atatürk was born Ali Riza Oğlu Mustafa in 1881 in Salonika, which is now Thessaloniki, a Greek city then belonging to the Ottoman Empire. I hope you can see. In addition to Turks, like his family, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews had lived there for generations. Atatürk's father, an army officer who died when he was a child, arranged for him to be educated in a secular school, despite his mother's preference that he attend a religious one. At age 12, Atatürk entered a military academy. There he earned his first nickname, Kemal, which means perfection. Later, as an officer, he participated in the 1908 Young Turks Revolt that forced the Sultan to restore constitutional monarchy. Although he joined pro-modernizing initiatives, he did not see eye to eye with the more radical nationalists of the Young Turks movement. During tours of duty in France, Austria, and Germany, Atatürk immersed himself in the European way of life, serving as a military attaché in Bulgaria, which was once part of the Ottoman Empire. He approved of how Bulgarian women danced in public. Why, he asked himself, shouldn't Turkish Muslim women in the empire do the same and discard head coverings? The Turkish fight back. Shaped by these reflections and other battle experiences in the First World War, Atatürk became known for his competence, determination, and composure under pressure. These leadership qualities led to the Sultan's government tasking Atatürk with restoring discipline and order to the empire's remaining army. However, Atatürk had other plans. Soon after arriving at the port of Samsun on the Black Sea in 1919, he decided to abandon the mission he'd been assigned. Instead, he took the lead in military resistance against foreign occupation. He convened 2 congresses and rallied forces to establish a government under his leadership. The new government was based in Ankara, a city in central Anatolia. Atatürk was based there for 4 years, during which time he led a tireless effort to consolidate Turkish territory. In the northeast, he defeated the Armenians, from whom he seized significant land. In 1921, the Italians agreed to withdraw from Anatolia, followed by the defeat of the Greeks at the Battle of Sakarya River, just 50 miles from Ankara. The British eventually withdrew. The assembly bestowed on Atatürk the title of Ghazi, or victor, for his accomplishments. Faced with the advance of Atatürk's troops, Sultan Mehmed VI boarded a British battleship and went into exile. Atatürk had become the strongman of Turkey and was recognized by the European powers as such. He successfully negotiated a new peace treaty with them that enshrined Turkey's complete independence. On October 29, 1923, the Republic of Turkey was proclaimed with Ankara as its capital, and Atatürk was appointed its first president. Adapt or die. Goodness. Re-elected president several times until he died in 1938, Atatürk implemented a modernization program unparalleled in the history of the Islamic world. His goal was the complete Westernization of Turkey, with the objective of putting it on an equal footing with European countries. It was an initiative built on the aims of the Young Turks, a movement Atatürk had belonged to, but it also drew on his experience as a cosmopolitan figure with knowledge of the modern world. The Westernization of Turkey became his priority as soon as he came into power in 1923. Atatürk summed up his ideology in these words, quote, "If you refuse to enter resolutely into modern life, if you refuse the obligations it imposes, you will be pariahs, outcasts, isolated in your obstinacy, with your habits from other times. Remain yourselves, but take from the West that which is indispensable to the life of a developed people. Let science and new ideas come in freely. If you don't, they will devour you." In Atatürk's eyes, the significant obstacle to this policy was the practice of Islam. As an admirer of the French Revolution's limitation of the influence of religion on the state, Atatürk sought to bring about a similar revolution. In 1923, he agreed to allow a cousin of the deposed sultan to retain the religious title of caliph in name only. But the following year, the caliphate was abolished, sending shockwaves throughout the Islamic world. The question of women. Atatürk's most significant westernizing reform addressed the legal status of women. In 1926, a new civil code was enacted that abolished polygamy, made divorce a civil action, and established equal inheritance rights for men and women. However, the man remained head of the household, and a wife still needed her husband's permission to work outside the home. In 1934, women obtained the right to vote, much earlier than in many European countries. In February 1935, 18 women were elected to Ankara's parliament. Atatürk also set a personal example with his 1923 marriage to Latife Hanım, an educated woman who did not wear a headscarf and championed women's rights. They divorced soon after in 1925. Atatürk's westernizing zeal also extended to clothing. While the headscarf was not officially banned for women, Western dress was strongly encouraged. However, the president's taste for the West did not extend to full democracy. the Republican People's Party he founded acted almost as a single party. In 1930, he authorized an opposition party but dissolved it when it became successful. He ruthlessly crushed the Kurdish rebellion of 1925, which sought to restore the caliphate, and in essence was a revolt against Turkish oppression. Atatürk died on November 10th, 1938. His liver problems, diagnosed as cirrhosis, were said to be the cause of his death. He was 57. Conservative clerics, hostile to the reduction of the influence of Islam, did not mourn his passing, nor did Turks yearning for more democratic freedoms or Kurds and other minorities who had suffered under his regime. Nevertheless, Atatürk, the name he adopted in 1934, was already a legendary figure, a colossus who had, from the ruins of a decaying multinational empire, forged a unified modern nation. Okay, let's read these boxes up here. It says, Father of the Turks. In 1934, the Turkish parliament passed a westernizing reform requiring the adoption of fixed surnames to be passed on to the next generation. Previously, Turks had identified themselves by their first name, sometimes with the addition of a title such as Pasha, Bey, or their father's name. Atatürk was originally called Ali Riza Oğlu Mustafa, as in Mustafa, son of Ali Riza. Following the new law, he replaced his given name, Mustafa, with Kemal, and adopted the surname Atatürk, meaning father of the Turks. The law attempted to prohibit surnames that reflected non-Turkish ethnicity and force those in minority groups to assume Turkish surnames. Yeah, Turkey, they did not have last names until Atatürk forced people to get last names. Which I wonder why. Let's start over. I wonder if that's why there's a lot of like very common surnames in Turkey. Kind of like how in English we have like Smith, Johnson, like very common names. They have a lot of those in Turkey. I wonder if that's why. This is the Republic Monument in Istanbul with Atatürk right here in the front. You can see in very Western clothes, right? Here's another thing he did. New era, new alphabet. One of Atatürk's most far-reaching reforms was the replacement of the Arabic alphabet with one based on the Latin alphabet. Writing and reading the Turkish language in Arabic script was increasingly problematic in the late 1800s, since the Latin alphabet dominated typesetting and the telegraph. Reformers also believed that the Arabic alphabet system was a root cause of the illiteracy among much of the Turkish population. Atatürk was determined to introduce reform, but waited a few years until he was sure he could overcome resistance, particularly from the clergy. In 1928, he set up a commission for alphabet reform. When one of its members told him the process would take 5 years to carry out, Atatürk replied sharply, "This will either happen in 6 months or it won't happen at all." Within 3 weeks, a new Turkish alphabet based on the Latin alphabet was produced. Atatürk gave a demonstration of it in an Istanbul square. The first text read aloud in the new alphabet stated, "My friends, our rich and harmonious language will now be able to display itself with new Turkish letters. We must free ourselves from these incomprehensible signs, which for centuries have held our minds in an iron vice. You must learn the new Turkish letters quickly. Teach them to your compatriots, to women and to men, to porters and to boatmen." Could have just said to everyone, but oh well. says in 1929, two people read a poster aimed at helping Turks convert to the new Latin alphabet system. Convenient little poster there. Here's a bust of Atatürk dressed in European style. This is in Antalya. And here he is giving a little lesson. The F, there's K. We got some U's and this U. We got the I without the dot and the I with the dot. Various different letters there. Looking west, it says, Turks stroll through Istanbul in 1932. Their clothing style reflects Atatürk's westernizing policies. And you can see, the traditional hats, but Western clothes. It looks like this lady here is scarfed, but this lady is not a camera. Looks like she might have a little headscarf around, but I can't quite tell if that's her hair or not. But this guy's just wearing a straight up boater hat, and he's wearing like a fedora hat, right? Interesting. That like mishmash of clothes. Commanding victory. This illustration depicts the defeat of the Greek army in 1922, concluding the Greco-Turkish War. Atatürk commanded the Ottoman forces. This has flying colors. Atatürk adopted 13 children. One of them was Sabiha Gökçen, who shared his love of aviation and enrolled to become a pilot in 1936. Guinness World Records recognizes her as the first female combat pilot. And here she is photographed in 1987, looking like Amelia Earhart in this getup. Pretty cool. Neat outfit. And here he is. It says, a reserved and stylish partygoer. Although he enjoyed spending alcohol-fueled evenings with friends, Atatürk was a serious and reserved man who exuded strength and impressed those around him. Supercilious, contemptuous look in those cold blue eyes seemed to classify him as a creature of a separate species, Patrick Kinross wrote in his 1964 biography, Atatürk, The Rebirth of a Nation. Atatürk was also distinguished by his extreme elegance in dressing in Western fashion, with suits from the best European tailors. So yeah, it says this is him in his Ottoman army commander's uniform in 1918. You can see all these big old medals he's won. Those are huge. And then here's a fez. This is Turkish fez from the early 20th century. Later, Kemal Atatürk discouraged its use, urging men to wear Western style hats. Here's a little timeline. It says soldier and statesman. 1881. Ali Riza Oğlu Mustafa is born to Turkish parents in Ottoman-controlled northern Greece. He's nicknamed Kemal. 1914 to 1918. During World War I, he gains prominence resisting foreign domination of Turkey following the Ottoman defeat. 1923, he is proclaimed President of the Republic of Turkey on October 29th, following the Sultan's departure. 1926, he introduces a new civil code that gives women more rights. In 8 years' time, women can vote. To 1938, now known as Atatürk, father of the Turks, he dies of cirrhosis in Istanbul at age 57. And that is our articles for tonight. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed these. If you did and want to participate in History Magazine article selection, again, you can click the join button or the first link in the description box down there to become a channel member. I do hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a good night. Good night. Good night.